Thank you for watching the video. Through the story, I invite you to a place of peace and gentle sleep. Please relax and take your time to drift off into a restful slumber.
The mission begins. The night was still, cloaked in the soft silver of a crescent moon. The trees stood tall and motionless, their branches barely stirring in the faint breeze. Not a sound could be heard, save for the gentle rustle of leaves. Through the forest, a figure moved with the precision of a shadow, blending into the darkness. His name was Tenko, a ninja whose reputation for stealth and cunning was whispered among both allies and enemies alike. Tonight, Tenko's mission was more dangerous than any he had undertaken before. His master had tasked him with retrieving a stolen scroll, a relic that contained ancient wisdom said to possess the power to alter the course of history. The scroll had fallen into the hands of a rival clan, and Tenko's mission was clear: recover it, or die trying. As he neared the enemy's stronghold, an abandoned temple deep in the heart of the forest, he paused to assess the situation. The temple loomed ahead, its ancient walls illuminated by the dim moonlight. Vines and moss clung to the stone, evidence of its long abandonment. However, Tenko knew it was anything but deserted tonight. The enemy clan had fortified the temple, guarding the scroll with their finest warriors. The air was heavy, thick with the tension of impending conflict. Tenko's senses were on high alert, every muscle in his body coiled and ready to react. His breathing was slow, controlled, as he surveyed the perimeter. Then, his sharp eyes caught the faintest glint of steel high in the treetops. Always lurking in the shadows, "Aren't you?" a voice called from above, breaking the silence. Tenko's gaze snapped upward, locking onto the source of the voice. There, perched among the branches, was one of the enemy clan scouts. The scout's blade gleamed in the moonlight, ready to strike. Tenko's heart quickened, but his expression remained calm and unreadable. Without hesitation, he darted into the shadows, his movements fluid and silent as water. The scout barely had time to react before Tenko closed the distance. With a swift, precise slash of his blade, the scout's life was extinguished in a heartbeat. The man collapsed to the ground with barely a sound. One less obstacle, Tenko muttered to himself, wiping the blood from his blade. He couldn't afford to waste time. The longer he lingered, the greater the risk of being discovered. The temple's stone walls rose before him, towering and impenetrable. But to Tenko, they were no more than a minor inconvenience. His fingers found purchase on the weathered stone, and with effortless grace, he scaled the wall. His movements were as natural as a spider climbing its web, each motion deliberate and soundless. Once atop the wall, Tenko crouched low, surveying the courtyard below. His sharp eyes counted the guards, more than he had anticipated. They were positioned at key points around the temple, alert and ready for any intruder. However, Tenko knew that even the most vigilant guards had their blind spots. From his vantage point, he could see the path he needed to take. The entrance to the temple lay ahead, guarded by two warriors, their swords drawn. Tenko considered his options, calculating the best way to proceed without alerting the entire stronghold. Suddenly, a low whistle pierced the night air. One of the guards stiffened, his attention drawn to the sound. The other guard turned his head, momentarily distracted. Tenko seized the opportunity. In one fluid motion, he dropped from the wall, landing silently behind them. Before the first guard could react, Tenko's blade was already at his throat. A swift, clean cut, and the man crumpled to the ground, his life extinguished. The second guard barely had time to register what had happened before Tenko was upon him. His sword flashed in the moonlight, and the second guard fell, his body joining his comrades on the cold earth. The path to the temple was clear, but Tenko knew that the hardest part of his mission still lay ahead. The scroll was inside, heavily guarded by the enemy's elite warriors. But Tenko was ready. He had been trained for this, honed by years of discipline and experience. As he approached the temple doors, his hand instinctively went to the hilt of his blade. Every sense was heightened, every movement precise. The silence of the temple was almost deafening, broken only by the faint sound of his heartbeat. He knew the enemy was waiting for him inside. The mission was just beginning. The temple's secrets. Stepping into the temple, the air shifted. The atmosphere was thick with age and the weight of forgotten rituals. Incense burned somewhere deep within the sanctum, filling the halls with a heady, almost intoxicating scent. The flickering glow of candlelight cast long, ominous shadows on the stone walls. Tenko's senses were on full alert, every fiber of his being attuned to the slightest disturbance. The temple, once a place of reverence, had been transformed into a fortress by the enemy clan. The corridors were lined with traps, designed to catch even the most skilled infiltrator off guard. Yet Tenko moved with the confidence of one who had trained for years to master every possible obstacle. His footsteps were as soft as a whisper, his breathing steady and controlled. As he approached the heart of the temple, the inner sanctum where the sacred scroll was kept, he could feel the weight of eyes watching him. He paused, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, his body tense with anticipation. There was no doubt in his mind that he was not alone. A voice cut through the stillness, low and cold. "You're not as invisible as you think, Tenko." From the shadows, a figure emerged. He was tall and imposing, his armor red and gold, a symbol of his status as the clan's finest warrior. He was known as the Red Hawk, feared for his speed and precision in battle. Tenko remained still, his gaze steady. He had heard of Red Hawk, a formidable opponent whose reputation rivaled his own. There was no room for error. "Turn back now," Red Hawk said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The scroll is not yours to take." Tenko's response was calm, but laced with determination. "The scroll belongs to no one. It must be returned." For a moment, neither warrior moved. They stood in silence, the tension between them thickening like the air before a storm. Then, without warning, the battle began. Red Hawk was fast, faster than Tenko had expected. His strikes were sharp and precise, each one aimed to kill. But Tenko was faster. He danced around Red Hawk's attacks, his blade flashing as he deflected each strike. The sound of steel on steel rang out, echoing through the empty halls of the temple. The two warriors were evenly matched, each testing the other's limits. Red Hawk's strength lay in his raw power, while Tenko's was in his speed and agility. It was a deadly dance, each movement calculated, each strike meant to end the fight. Tenko knew he couldn't afford to let the battle drag on. He had come for the scroll, and every moment spent fighting was a moment lost. He needed to find a way to end the fight quickly. With a sudden burst of speed, Tenko feinted to the left, drawing Red Hawk off balance. In that split second, Tenko struck, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Red Hawk staggered, a look of disbelief flashing across his face as he fell to the ground. For a moment, the only sound was the faint crackle of the burning incense. Tenko stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily but victorious. Without wasting another second, he pushed open the doors to the inner sanctum. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the air thick with the scent of incense. And there, resting on a stone pedestal, was the scroll. Tenko's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the pedestal. His fingers brushed the ancient parchment, the weight of his mission heavy on his mind. But as he reached for the scroll, the ground beneath him shifted. He leapt back just in time as the floor gave way, revealing a pit lined with deadly spikes. "Traps," Tenko muttered, his eyes narrowing. He should have known the enemy would go to any lengths to protect the scroll. Carefully, he circled the pedestal, searching for any other hidden dangers. Satisfied that the path was clear, he retrieved the scroll, tucking it safely into his cloak. His mission was far from over. The escape. Scroll secured in his cloak, Tenko knew his task was only half done. The hardest part remained, escaping the temple and returning the scroll to his master. Every step back toward the entrance felt heavier with the weight of what he carried. The knowledge hidden within the scroll was too dangerous to be left in enemy hands. Yet now that he possessed it, he had become the most wanted man in the province. As he retraced his steps through the temple's shadowed corridors, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the distance. Tenko paused, pressing himself against the cold stone wall, blending into the darkness. His sharp ears caught the faint murmur of voices, enemy warriors searching for him. "They found Red Hawk," one of the voices said, strained with disbelief. "He's dead." Tenko's pulse quickened. They were closing in. He needed to act fast before they blocked his escape route. The temple had become a labyrinth of death traps and armed guards, but Tenko was no stranger to danger. He had prepared for this, studied the layout, calculated every possible move. The path was perilous, but it was one he was prepared to take. With a deep breath, he slipped out of the alcove and darted down a side passage, moving swiftly yet silently. His feet barely touched the ground as he avoided the guards now swarming the temple. The flicker of torchlight on the walls marked their presence, but Tenko stayed one step ahead, weaving through the shadows like a phantom. But just as he neared the outer courtyard, he stopped. A trap, one he hadn't seen before, lay before him. A thin wire, almost invisible in the dark, stretched across the path. It was designed to trip anyone who passed, releasing a flurry of poison darts from the walls. Tenko crouched low, carefully inspecting the wire. It was crude but deadly. He pulled a small tool from his belt and with delicate precision cut the wire, disabling the mechanism. For a moment, he allowed himself a breath of relief, but it was short-lived. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. He had to move. The temple's gates loomed ahead, but the courtyard was filled with warriors. Tenko would have to fight his way out. He drew his blade, the familiar weight of it in his hand a comfort. His heart beat steadily in his chest as he stepped into the open, the cool night air hitting his face. The moon was his only witness as he faced the guards blocking his path. "Stop him," one of the men shouted, drawing his sword. Others followed suit, their weapons gleaming in the pale moonlight. Tenko's movements were swift, his blade flashing as he deflected their attacks. He moved like a shadow, slipping between his opponents, striking with deadly precision. The courtyard became a battlefield, but Tenko never faltered. Each guard that fell brought him one step closer to freedom. One of the warriors, a burly man with a long scar across his face, charged at Tenko with a spear. The weapon thrust toward him with deadly force, but Tenko sidestepped the attack, his blade slicing through the man's arm before he could react. The warrior dropped to the ground with a cry of pain. More guards closed in, but Tenko remained calm, his movements controlled and deliberate. He blocked their strikes with ease, countering with lethal efficiency. Every slash of his sword was precise, every step calculated. It was not just a fight, it was a dance of death. But as the last of the guards fell, Tenko felt a sharp pain in his side. A stray arrow had found its mark, embedding itself deep into his flesh. He staggered, his vision blurring for a moment. But there was no time to stop. He ripped the arrow from his body, gritting his teeth against the pain, and continued toward the gate. Blood soaked his side, but Tenko pushed forward. He could see the forest beyond the gates, the freedom that awaited him if he could just make it a few steps farther. His breath came in short, sharp bursts as he forced his body to keep moving. Finally, with a final burst of strength, Tenko reached the gates. He kicked them open, stumbling out into the forest. The trees welcomed him like old friends, their dark branches concealing him from the enemy. But he couldn't stop yet. He needed to get as far away from the temple as possible. Tenko pressed a hand to his side, trying to stem the flow of blood as he disappeared into the forest's embrace. The scroll was safe for now, but the journey was far from over. The final confrontation. Hours passed as Tenko made his way through the forest, each step more painful than the last. His wound burned, and his vision was growing faint from blood loss. Yet he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the scroll had to be delivered at all costs. He found a secluded spot by a river, hidden from view by the thick underbrush. There, he paused to catch his breath, leaning heavily against a tree. His hand clutched the scroll beneath his cloak, its weight a constant reminder of his mission. Suddenly, a rustling sound from the bushes caught his attention. Tenko's eyes snapped open, his senses immediately alert. He drew his sword, though his strength was fading fast. Out of the shadows stepped a figure, another ninja, cloaked in black, with eyes that gleamed with deadly intent. "I see you made it this far," the stranger said, his voice smooth and cold. "But you won't leave this forest alive." Tenko's heart sank. He recognized the man. This was Ryoma, the assassin sent by the rival clan to recover the scroll at any cost. "We don't have to do this," Tenko said, his voice strained with pain. "The scroll is too dangerous to remain in any one clan's hands." Ryoma smirked, drawing his own blade. "That's not for you to decide." The two ninjas stood in the moonlit clearing, the tension between them palpable. Tenko knew he was at a disadvantage, his wound had weakened him, and Ryoma was fresh, ready to fight. But he couldn't afford to lose. The scroll had to be protected. The battle began with lightning speed. Ryoma was fast, faster than any opponent Tenko had faced that night. His strikes were precise, his movements fluid. Tenko parried each attack, but his strength was fading. The wound in his side throbbed with every movement, and his vision blurred from exhaustion. Still, he fought on, determined to protect the scroll. Each clash of their blades echoed through the forest, the sound of steel on steel ringing out in the night. But Ryoma was relentless, his strikes growing more aggressive with each passing moment. Tenko's grip on his sword faltered as Ryoma's blades slashed across his chest. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Blood dripped onto the forest floor, staining the earth beneath him. Ryoma stood over him, his sword raised for the final blow. "It's over," Ryoma said, his voice cold. But just as Ryoma's blade descended, Tenko summoned the last of his strength. He rolled to the side, avoiding the fatal strike by a hair's breadth. With a desperate lunge, he thrust his sword upward, catching Ryoma off guard. His blade pierced through Ryoma's armor, sinking deep into his chest. Ryoma's eyes widened in shock as he staggered backward, clutching at the wound. He collapsed to the ground, his life slipping away with each ragged breath. Tenko remained on his knees, panting heavily. His vision was fading, and the world around him began to blur. But he had done it. The scroll was safe. As dawn broke over the horizon, Tenko knew his mission was complete. His body was weak, but his spirit was strong. He had succeeded where so many had failed. The scroll was safe, and the rival clan had been defeated. With one last look at the rising sun, Tenko closed his eyes, letting the peace of the forest envelop him.